Aloha, I'm Terry Lilley, a marine biologist here in the Hawaiian Islands. I hope you enjoy my film. Florida has a network of coastal barrier islands and intercoastal waterways. Beautiful Jupiter Island is one of these long, thin barrier islands. These islands are created by tidal and wave action, and they're basically just a big, long sand dune. Mangrove forests that grow all along these barrier islands are very important because they keep these sandy islands from shifting around during the middle of storms and hurricanes. The mangroves have deep roots. They hold the sand in place. And if the mangroves were destroyed, a lot of these homes would be at risk for being washed away during big surf or a hurricane. The mangroves in parts of Jupiter Island here have all been killed. Now it's just barren sand. And this is not good because it could make a lot more damage during storms and hurricanes. These barrier islands are home to thousands of different types of fish. Angelfish, these big giant Goliath groupers, hogfish, all of these fish have their babies in these very calm intercoastal waterways. Seahorses live there and hold on to the seagrass. Big schools of snook come into these intercoastal waterways to feed on massive schools of bait. These intercoastal waterways are very, very calm, and they're habitat to many endangered species and many different fish and marine life species, including the manatees. These are the beautiful batfish that have big schools in these waterways. Big, gigantic schools of bait come into these waterways, especially with the big change of tide that happens every day. And these bait are obviously food to a lot of the bigger fish that come in to eat them and lay their eggs, including these very, very cute burrfish. Manatee are very peaceful 1,000-pound marine mammals that feed on seagrass in the mangrove forests in these coastal waterways. They're very much looking like a big cow underwater with a paddle-shaped tail like a mermaid. They're fully protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. They need to eat about 10% of their body weight every day, but the problem is a lot of their food, the seagrass, has been killed by the wakes of speeding boats. These big marine mammals have to go a long distance over the open sand now to try to find food that they need to eat in a large quantity. They're very, very, very wonderful creatures to be with and so peaceful and humble, and they just want to meander about their environment and have their babies and feed on the seagrass. But you can see over 25% of them have been hit by the propellers of the speeding boats. They tear up parts of their tail. They actually crack the bones in the head of the manatee and kill many of them. So a lot of these manatee right now, because they're very slow moving, they simply cannot get away from these speeding boats. Just the same with the sea turtles are having the same problem here. There's all kinds of boats zooming back and forth at various different speeds. There's nothing wrong with having a fast boat or a fast car. But the bottom line is, if you have a fast car, you can't zoom 100 miles an hour right by a schoolyard where all the kids are. These boats are going so fast and they're racing each other up and down these waterways that they run into the manatees. This is a huge violation of the Federal Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act. Manatees are missing their tails, they're missing part and chunks out of their head and their flippers. And so this is a huge problem here. It's not a county or a state problem. These boaters are violating the US Endangered Species Act by running into the manatees and breaking their bones. They're also endangering boaters that are in small boats. They're flipping small boats over right on top of the manatees. At the same time, they're endangering paddlers and snorkelers that are in the water. The EPA, NOAA, and US Fish and Wildlife Service are supposed to be protecting manatee habitat, but no one is there to enforce the law. Please listen closely to the wording of the US Endangered Species Act.
Section 9 of the ESA makes it unlawful for any person subject to the jurisdiction of the United States to take any endangered or threatened species. To take a species is defined in Section 3 as to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect, or to attempt to engage in any such conduct. The ESA provides for enforcement of these provisions in Section 11, which authorizes civil and criminal penalties for violations. The FWS has defined harm in the definition of take to mean an act which actually kills or injures wildlife. Such act may include significant habitat modification or degradation where it actually kills or injures wildlife by significantly impairing essential behavioral patterns, including breeding, feeding or sheltering. The FWS has defined harass in the definition of take to mean an intentional or negligent act or omission which creates the likelihood of injury to wildlife by annoying it to such an extent as to significantly disrupt normal behavioral patterns which include, but are not limited to, breeding, feeding, or sheltering.
You can clearly see that the speeding boats are violating the US Endangered Species Act under the harm and harass clause by hitting the manatee and at the same time destroying the manatee's habitat. This is highly illegal. There are good places to run high-speed boats, and there are bad places to run high-speed boats. And the worst place is right in the middle of endangered species habitat because it violates one of the most important federal laws we have on the books. The other problem with the high-speed boats is that they're killing all of the mangroves and tearing out the important seagrass with their boat wakes. The other thing that the high-speed boats are doing is they're interfering with dive research teams that are out documenting the marine life and the habitat inside these intercoastal waterways, and anybody out with a dive flag. The Coast Guard has laws forbidding high-speed boats to be zooming around people with dive flags. You can clearly see here how the boat wakes tear out the seagrass. They also ruin the mangroves, which makes way more wear and tear on the boats that are parked on the boat docks. So the boat docks are falling apart, the mangroves are falling apart, and the seagrass is being removed by these boat wakes. This habitat was not designed to have waves in it. That's the habitat on the other island out in the sea. So these boat wakes are doing really a ton of damage to the entire ecosystem here and the habitat for the manatee, sea turtles, and other protected species. Mangroves do not do good with waves. That's why they grow in intercoastal waterways and not as much out on the sandy ocean beach. These boat parties are also violating the US Endangered Species Act. They tear up the mangroves and the seagrass with boat anchors, and then they throw their garbage overboard. All of this is killing the mangrove forest up and down the intercoastal waterways, and that's going to not only destroy the habitat for the manatee, but it's going to make all of these homes in worse condition when a hurricane comes in. There are also new bridges and train tracks that are being built currently right now over these intercoastal waterways, and my best guess is that they didn't do the proper study under the US Endangered Species Act before they started building these huge structures. The mangrove forest is the best place in all of Florida for marine life. A good mangrove forest has all kinds of mussels and clams growing on the roots. There's tons of fish that live in here, including baby grouper and baby snook and angelfish. So when it's destroyed, it ruins the habitat of the baby fish. So therefore, that's going to start over time to reduce the amount of big fish that live outside these mangrove forests. We really have to protect this area for many reasons. And once again, it is protected under federal law and protected by previous court cases that have happened in the state of Florida. These mangroves not only add air and oxygen to the water, They protect the coastline from deadly hurricanes like what just happened on the Gulf side of Florida. Out on the ocean side of Jupiter Island, there's a beautiful beach. This beach is actually home to 4 different types of sea turtles that lay their eggs there up on the sand. These turtles have to lay their eggs in certain temperature of the sand and certain humidity of the sand. So they need a really big sandy beach to find the right place to lay their eggs. On the banks of the intercoastal waterways here in Florida live the endangered gopher tortoise. These tortoises build burrows, dig burrows way back into the side of the banks near the waterways. They eat vegetation and flowers, but for them to reproduce and not go extinct, they need to have a nice sandy bank that they can dig in and lay their eggs in. What's happening is the speeding boats with the boat wakes are eroding these important sandy banks. So the gopher tortoise may not be able to find a suitable place to lay its eggs in the future. The endangered species are all over this part of Florida. From the sea turtles to the gopher tortoises to the manatees, lots of endangered species call this place home. The green sea turtles come in and nest on the beach. They also go inside of the lagoons in the intercoastal waterways to rest and to feed. So these nests with the eggs buried in the sand are right in front of all the hotels here. The problem is now, again, with rising sea levels, when waves come up, the turtle eggs get removed by the surf from the nest and all die on the beach. So it's super important to have these homes that are set back quite a ways so the beach during the rising sea levels can erode it properly and still give places for the turtles to nest. There's loggerhead turtles, there's leatherback turtles, green sea turtles that all call these intercoastal waterways home. And again, these animals are all protected under the US Endangered Species Act. You can see here where a lot of the boats party and the boat wakes go by very quickly. It's tearing apart the sandy banks of these intercoastal waterways. It's also killing the turtles, which is a violation of the Endangered Species Act. So there's many violations going on here under federal law. Please listen to this lawsuit and legal agreement that already decided in court to protect the manatee and their habitat here in Florida.
Florida's endangered manatee population received a welcome boost in a landmark legal settlement reached between conservationists and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Stemming from a lawsuit filed by a coalition of 18 national and state environmental, animal protection, and public interest groups charging that the commission was allowing high-speed boat traffic in critical manatee habitat, this agreement is being viewed as a victory for the rare mammals and a step in the right direction for cooperation between the agency and environmentalists. The problem has been that boaters and other watercraft users have been speeding way too fast in areas where manatees live, and they've been hitting and killing them in record numbers, said Judith Valle of Save the Manatee Club, a plaintiff in the suit. Even though the state implemented some speed regulations in the early 1990s to curb these occurrences, they were never fully enforced or implemented. The FWCC staff will propose adopting additional slow speed zones in 9 of Florida's coastal counties where current speed limits are a danger to manatees. Manatee populations in these areas are high, and boat manatee collisions are frequent. Commission staff will also propose 14 new sanctuaries where watercraft activity will be off-limits or sharply limited. These sanctuaries will be in known calving or feeding grounds for manatees. It's important to note that what we're doing here is protecting manatees, not restricting boaters, said Manly Fuller, president of the Florida Wildlife Federation, one of the plaintiffs. The new speed zones will not only help to protect this endangered animal, but they will also help to ensure a safe experience on the water for families and other boaters as well. Speeding boats are a major threat to manatees. The majority of adult manatees in Florida have at least one propeller scar, many bear multiple scars and lesions. Since 1974, we know that at least 988 manatees have been killed by boats, added David Guest of Earth Justice Legal Defense Fund, lead attorney for the coalition. Countless others have been injured, some horribly disfigured by watercraft. Slowing these crafts down and leaving a few unspoiled areas where boats aren't permitted will certainly help prevent deaths and injuries. Today's settlement greatly improves the possibility of recovery for this species. The above paragraphs were written over 20 years ago, and the situation today is more dire than ever. The issues have been studied, the solutions have been proposed, consensus has been reached, lawsuits have been filed and won. And yet, speed zones aren't enforced, breeding sanctuaries don't exist, law enforcement is chronically overwhelmed and under-resourced. The mangroves, seagrass and sandy beaches comprise a critical ecosystem for the manatee, sea turtles and other creatures of these coastal waters.
You can all help by sharing this video and contacting your federal congressional representatives, the EPA, NOAA, and the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and demand that the federal law enforcement folks come to Jupiter Island and enforce our federal wildlife laws. Thank you for watching.